Good evening, everybody. My name is Alvarado-Faxon, and my espionage case study is on Robert Hanssen. Robert Philip Hanssen was an FBI special agent for 25 years, entering the Bureau in 1976 and remaining with them up until the time of his arrest in 2001. 3 years after joining the FBI, he made contact with the Soviet Main Intelligence Directorate, or GRU, and offered his services as a double agent. For over 22 years, Robert Hanssen sold thousands of top-secret documents to the Soviets. Many of the documents detailed military weapons technologies, operating aspects of United States counterintelligence program, as well as names of Soviet double agents that worked for the FBI. During the 22 years as a double agent, he collected over $1 million in cash and diamonds from the Soviets. When the Commission for Review of FBI Security Programs issued their final report to Attorney General John Ashcroft, in the first sentences of the executive summary, the Commission stated that the Commission was established in response to possibly the worst intelligence disaster in the United States history, the treason of Robert Hanssen, an FBI supervisory special agent who over 22 years gave the Soviet Union and Russia vast quantities of documents and computer diskettes filled with national security information of incalculable value. Robert Hanssen was born and raised in the conservative Chicago neighborhood of Norwood Park, Illinois. It was considered a Republican ward in Mayor Daley's Chicago. Many police, firefighters, teachers, and city employees lived in the neighborhood. His father, Howard, who was a police officer in Chicago, and as the author David Wise notes in his book, Spy, The Inside Story of How FBI's Robert Hanssen Betrayed America, his father was more than just strict and at times physically abusive towards his son. Prior to getting his MBA, Hanssen had applied to the NSA to become a cryptographer, but due to budget cuts, he was denied. He enrolled in dental school at Northwestern University. However, he was not passionate about that major and thus changed his focus to study business, graduating with his MBA in Accounting and Information Systems in 1972. After working for an accounting firm, he again changed focus and applied to the Chicago Police Department, where he worked for 4 years as an internal affairs investigator. Hanssen met his wife Bonnie Walk, already a staunch Catholic, while he was in dental school at Northwestern. They had 6 children, all who attended schools run or affiliated with Opus Dei. In 1976, Hanssen became an FBI agent. After a stint in Gary, Indiana, he was transferred to the New York office and assigned to the Counterintelligence Unit. He was tasked with compiling a database of Soviet intelligence for the FBI. He later was moved to D.C. and worked in the FBI's Office of Budget, which gave him access to many of the FBI's top-secret operations. After working for Budget for several years, he was transferred again, now working for the department in charge of evaluating Soviet agents who were willing to sell secrets to the United States, determining whether or not they were credible. During what is considered Hanssen's first cycle of betrayal towards the United States, between the years 1979 and 1981, Hanssen made the approach to the GRU, walking directly into the Amtorg office and offering to be a double agent for them. During these years, Hanssen worked for the Counterintelligence Unit and was able to provide the GRU with various activities in which the United States was bugging Soviet agencies. His biggest leak of human source during those years was the betrayal of Dmitry Polyakov, otherwise known as Top Hat, a former CIA double agent who passed large amounts of information to the United States. It was said that he kept the Cold War from exploding and was considered an agent of extreme importance. Originally, the spy Aldrich Ames was blamed for selling Polyakov out. However, after Hanssen's arrest and interrogation, it was shown that he had originally been the culprit. Years went by in which Hanssen did not commit espionage until 1985, when he once again opened communications with the Soviets, this time sending a letter directly to the KGB. As in previous years, Hanssen again sold names of Soviet double agents. However, his most damaging intel sold involved the construction of the new Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. The Soviets had begun construction on a new embassy in Washington, D.C., and at the same time, the FBI decided that they would launch construction as well on an underground tunnel that would run beneath the new embassy to be manned by the NSA around the clock. To this day, government officials still deny existence of such a project. In 1989, the same year he sold embassy plans, he compromised Felix Bloch. The KGB broke off all communication with Bloch and thus ruined the investigation that the FBI was running. This act by Hanssen is what eventually led to his capture and arrest. From 1992 until his capture in 2001, he continued to sell highly classified information to what was now the Russian Federation, as the USSR had ceased to exist. Robert Hanssen's method of exchange. Neither the KGB or the GRU ever knew the identity of Robert Hanssen. Over the years, each agency had asked to have him meet with a handler. However, he always refused. Instead, Hanssen used the old-fashioned system of dead drops. He would leave signals for them, times and dates, and his handlers would leave a package in a public park under a creek bridge in Faxon Park in Vienna, Virginia. This was a site of his choosing, and he never used sites that his handlers had suggested. It was in this park where Hanssen was eventually arrested. Hanssen also went by code names, either Ramon or Ramon Garcia. He would leave tape or marks on utility poles. Signal Site Lewis and Wolf Creek Bridge was known as Signal Site Ellis. The eventual identification and arrest of Robert Hanssen. In the late 90s, the FBI and CIA formed a joint task force to find suspected intelligence leaks. The two leaks that remained unsolved was the embassy tunnel and the Felix Bloch case. Their list was narrowed down as they knew only a handful of people had access to both cases. Though other moles were discovered, it seems Hanssen escaped their notice still. New profiling techniques were used, however. This still pointed away from Hanssen. What helped move the investigation along was the payoff of ex-Soviet officer who had an audio conversation between a KGB agent and an unknown. The FBI paid $7 million for this tape, and it was a colleague of Hanssen's that recognized his voice, and a quote he once used that the colleague found so strange he never forgot it. Thus, a case was opened against Hanssen, and he was placed under surveillance. The FBI moved into a new job and gave him an assistant who turned out to be an undercover FBI agent by the name of Eric O'Neill. O'Neill was eventually able to get evidence needed to arrest Hanssen, and on February 18th of 2001, Robert Hanssen was arrested after he left a sealed bag of classified papers under the footbridge in Faxon Park. When FBI agents moved in for the arrest, Hanssen asked, "What took you so long?" Outcome. 5 months after he was arrested outside Faxon Park in Vienna, Virginia, Robert Hanssen pled guilty to 14 counts of espionage and 1 act to commit espionage. He was sentenced in the U.S. District Court of Virginia. He made a plea bargain with the investigators in order to avoid the death penalty. Robert Hanssen was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. He is incarcerated at ADX Florence, a supermax prison near Florence, Colorado. He was apologetic after his arrest, cooperating fully with all investigators. He apologized for his acts of espionage and for putting his family members through the media circus that this then became. The damage is done. During Robert Hanssen's life as a double agent, he compromised the identities of several human sources, Dmitry Polyakov being the most valuable. He passed thousands of documents that also compromised the FBI and their counterintelligence operations. Following his arrest, the Office of the Inspector General opened a case to review the FBI's performance in deterring and detecting and investigating the acts of Robert Hanssen. The report made note of reasons that Hanssen's espionage went unnoticed for so long. It stated that Hanssen appeared to maintain a life that was not consistent of that of a spy. He was a devout Catholic and espoused politically conservative as well as anti-communist views. He did not do drugs, he did not gamble, or spend money too much. When Robert Hanssen was asked why he did it, he said it was simply for financial reasons and nothing else. After the OAG's review was submitted, they concluded that due to the lack of security procedures, Robert Hanssen was allowed to go undetected for almost the entirety of his career. The commission review of the FBI concluded that though security programs were not given a high priority, history has shown that espionage and security breaches are inevitable and that they may happen. Implementing steps to deter such occurrences, agencies can minimize their risk. The two commissions that were conveyed was the Office of the Inspector General's investigation of the FBI and a separate commission of review of FBI security programs, both under the purview of the U.S. Department of Justice. The damage of loss of life and undercover agents was numerous. Besides Dmitry Polyakov, there were 3 or 4 others that could be attributed to him. Intelligence losses, some that we know and some that we don't know, are still being found after all this time. These are the sources that I used in researching Robert Hanssen. David Wise wrote the book Spy, The Inside Story of How the FBI's Robert Hanssen Betrayed America. I found this book extremely useful, and it was a quick and easy read. Elaine Shannon and Anne Blackman also wrote a book, The Spy Next Door, The Extraordinary Secret Life of Robert Philip Hanssen, the Most Damaging FBI Agent in U.S. History. This book was also well written and I found interesting. The 3 other sources that I used was the Commission's review, the U.S. Department of Justice Commission for Review of FBI Security Programs, and the U.S. Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General, a review of the FBI's performance in deterring, detecting, and investigating the espionage activities of Robert Philip Hanssen. And then the FBI had a histories page of famous cases, and Robert Hanssen obviously being one of them. I also used their page and history as a source. I found it interesting that he spent almost the entirety of his career, minus 3 years, as a double agent. And some of the incidences, security breaches that he got away with, I found interesting as well. A couple of them were high security breaches in which he installed software in order to get around some firewalls, and he chalked it up to needing to install a colored printer, which I am a federal employee, and to this day, in our day and age now, that would never fly. So I found that interesting as well. Some of the other things were just little things. His brother-in-law found money that he couldn't explain, and that Robert couldn't explain. So I just, a lot of flags were raised and nobody seemed to notice. So that is another thing that I found interesting. But I thank you for spending the time to review my presentation. Good night.